Hello, Diva. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you, Pastor Vincent?
I'm all well, thank you. I'm here and hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Hello, hello. I'm here. My name is Vincent. Vincent Ariswara. I'm a Surabayan. Okay, but I moved to United States 17 years ago. So I'm here in at the comfort of my home at Union City, but my ministry is at San Jose area, Bay Areas, California. So yeah, if you happen to be around here, you're welcome to visit me or visit my hometown. My home here. But it's so good to see you all. And as Diva said it, I hope all of you can use your camera so that we can all see you. I was there yesterday. I was there and was being part of the first session yesterday, and I was quite fascinated by the whole talk and the sharing. And you got a lot of QA, and it's wonderful to see this. And you got to be proud of yourself that this is like an international conference. All right, you got international speakers, and you're part of this big global thing, and it's just a wonderful thing. So that's why I thought, the speakers tonight I'm very excited about, and they will be more excited if they can see your faces. Don't hide your faces. All right, you got a beautiful faces, so just show it off. Show it off. All right. I know some of you. Yesterday, I noticed some of you just like ngantuk gitu ya, angop-angop, gitu sama ngupil-ngupil gitu ya. Nggak apa-apa. It's okay. It's okay. You can just be comfortable in your couch, in your sofa, in your bedroom. It's fine. You wearing your pajama, wearing singlet, it's okay. It's just as long as you're just comfortable with that, we're just gonna have fun here. All right. So yeah, without a further ado, I think I have to open in prayer, and then I will introduce to you our theme or topic of the day and two speakers that are about to present their materials for all of you, and I'm really excited about them. All right, let's open with prayers. Let us pray. Oh Lord God, we thank you for your wonderful blessings that comes into this uh, through the shape of this event. We're just so glad that we can all be part of this wonderful conference, international conference, that though we are separated physically, we are united in our hearts and in spirit, because we know your Holy Spirit to surround us and enfold us in your embrace, so that we can be one and talk about the future of our lives, the future of our community, and the future of the world. So we are blessed that we have this opportunity. So God bless us, so that you can also please also bless the speakers who are going to present their heart to us all, so that they can share the wisdom that only comes from you. So we thank you, God, and bless everyone here. We may be a little tired or maybe a little restless about what's going on in the world, but we know that this day you have established for us to celebrate and to enjoy. So we'd like to celebrate it with so much excitement. Thank you, God. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, friends. So I'm going to pull out my notes here. Just bear with me. This is my first time moderating an international conference like this. So if it's a little sketchy, that's because I have no experience before. All right. So I have to admit this. Okay. So for the topic of the day, it's a society life and a normal life. And I'm very excited about the two speakers. The first speaker that we have here is Reverend Dr. Binsar Jonathan Pahan. He's now the Dean of Public Relation and Associate Professor at the Jakarta Theological Seminary in the field of ethics, philosophy, and public theology. Man, this guy is heavy, all right, heavy duty. So I'm very excited for you to listen and to open your heart for this, his wisdom. So he's going to talk about about our relationship with our community, what we can do, and so on and so forth. And the second one is Rabbi Melanie Aaron, and she is a rabbi. This is and she is my special friend, and she and I got to know each other. And my city in my ministry city in San Jose is not far from where she lead her congregation in Los Gatos. So she's a rabbi from a Jewish community, and she is going to present to introduce to you a lot of some aspects of the Jewish community. I know when I was growing up in Indonesia, okay, man, I'm old now. Don't mention my age, all right? But when I was growing up, I have never heard a Jewish community in Surabaya actually, right? So I didn't really I never met a Jewish community exists in Surabaya. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for all of you to get to know Rabbi Melanie Aaron. She is her congregation is called the Shir Hadash. It means a new song in Hebrew. Okay, it's a new song, the psalmist sing the new song to the Lord. So, right, so we are going to hear from these two speakers. So without a further ado, I would like to call Reverend Dr. Binsar Pahan. Can you all give a round of applause for Pak Binsar?
All right. Thank you, Pastor Vincent, for the introduction. I hope you're doing well in the States. As we are here, I can see that everybody is doing well. Probably it's too early in the morning because due to COVID, I think we're sleeping much later and waking up a lot later. I think even my 7-year-old son is waking up at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock nowadays. It's really a new habit, I think. Now I'm very happy to be here. So I'm gonna just present the materials that I have. So shout out to all of you. I hope you're all doing well. I see some of my former students are also here helping. With the event. So I'm gonna share my presentation. So today I'm gonna talk about a society. So how we are going to see the relation between youth, in particular, or the churches in general, with society, yeah, at large. I'm going to share some experiences also from Indonesia, but I can also share some of my knowledge about people who are living in different parts, probably from the region Asia and also in Europe, where I lived for some years. Um, so today we're going to talk about society, and the questions are, what is our role in society, right? So I think there are two different poles. The first one is like, we have to change the society, right? So the church has to change society. We have to go there as the youth of the church. That is our responsibility. We have to transform the society, or that's dealing with the world is not our task as church members. Or our task is only helping those in need, right? So these are two different poles, and I can show you what I mean by this. When we are saying this, so think about this. This is a question for all of us. What the example is it our task to help those affected by COVID-19 pandemic as church members? I think most of you will say yes. People help other people. I know that a lot of churches are now actively involved in giving out social help for other people in their neighborhood, and I think that's wonderful. But if we take this a little step further, are we going to be involved in the nationwide discussion on education? For instance, can the church speak something about education? And can we, or if we want to go further, can we talk about the issue on corruption, for instance? Can we talk about the issue of the things that are happening in your nations, in our own regions? Or uh, can we be involved in lobbying the government to produce the law? Right. So this is another step forward, another step uh, further than the previous. And the last one is, can we be participating in peaceful act of protest on the streets? For instance, churches are active in Black Lives Matter in the States, or maybe in some GKI, you know that we have GKI Taman Yasmin, or should we go to the streets to protest, right? So these are the questions. Until how far can we go as a church? So we just, our business is not of this world. So we just have to ask people to think about what God wants and think about heaven, or should be really involved in the things that made you have to negotiate with the government. And these are the questions that we have to think about. Now, there are two Bible texts that I would like to show you. The first one is Jeremiah 29:7. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Well, I know Rabbi Melanie will probably say something about this, but Jeremiah 29:7 is a Bible text that we often use as a sign that the church should also try to make a better place in their surroundings, in their neighborhood. So our task is not only helping people, but we have to go there and try to transform the society, try to change it. So if it's not a good society, you go there and change it. So like the story from our friends in the Philippines. If the government is not good, so you go there and change it. I know some pastors, good colleagues of mine, the head of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, who are really involved in some of the issues. And I think he told me that he's threatened by the government, so he's a bit worried about the things that are happening in the Philippines. Or we go to Habakkuk 3 verse 17 to 18. If you see this, though the fig tree does not blossom and no fruit is on the vines, though everything is bad, but I will rejoice in the Lord. So the second part is saying like, if even though everything is bad, I will praise the Lord. The first one seems to indicate that if something is bad, you go change it. The second one will say if it's bad, then okay, now you go accept it. Reinhold Niebuhr says, this is an American theologian, he said, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. And probably you have seen this prayer somewhere in the poster or memes or whatever. But nowadays, there's another quote that are often being portrayed. For instance, one by Angela Davis, Black Lives Matter use this. I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change, right? So are you going to accept the things that you cannot change? Or are you going to change the things that you cannot accept? So these are two positions that you have to think about. If you see it, how far do you want to go as a believer, as a Christian, or as a member of a society? How far are you willing to go? Are you going to change it? For instance, in the United States, there are a lot of things that are happening right now, especially during pandemic issue. In Indonesia, we also have a lot of question. Actually, our government also have questionable acts. If you remember, Indonesia in the beginning of the pandemic, the government said, "Oh, we could not catch COVID-19. Let's ask people to promote Indonesia so that people can come here and enjoy their vacation time here in Indonesia. And then 2 weeks later, the first case. So it's what do you do? Are you going to accept the things that you cannot change? Or are you going to change the things that you cannot accept? Now, the relations between the church and society is always going up and down, up and down. First, in the beginning, because a lot of people in the church were not part of the, were not accepted by the government. Sorry, there are motorcycles going around this this campus. It's really funny. But anyways, that's my problem. Right? Right. Because it's empty, so people are racing. I mean, it's really it's Jakarta. You have to come here and see it. So in the beginning, the church and state was separated because the church was not a part of the society, right? And then during the 4th century, somehow the emperor of Rome became Christian, and there are a lot of things that are happening. Augustine, for instance, he wrote The City of God and the City of Man, and then he said, well, we have to separate the temptation of the flesh and the spirit. The spirit is good, the flesh is bad. And then furthermore, the government agrees with the church. So the Christianity was accepted as one of the religions of the state. And then in the 6th century, actually the government rules some law that arranges what considered to be private area. For instance, if you divorce your wife in the 6th century, there's an edict that the government will punish you. So if you're divorced, that is a moral matter, that is your family matter, the government will punish you. So the state was really involved in the government, and as you can see, I want to show you one picture here. If you can see in the middle, this is a typical Middle Age century map of European cities. In the middle, you see the priest house, right? The priest house and the church are closer to the people. And that's why every political power has to submit or at least negotiate with the church, because the church is the power. And this is happening during the Middle Age, and then that's why later on Martin Luther, John Calvin, they said, well, we have to separate this. It's not true. It's not right. How can the state arrange or decide what's happening in the church? The church has their own role. The government has their own role. Now we are separated. And then in the early 1800s, there's social gospel movement, and then they said, no. The church has to be involved in the society. The church must bring God's kingdom to the world. And then one of the leading theologians in that time was Walter Rauschenbusch. And then he said, well, it was the church's duty to help the poor, right? And not only helping the poor, we have to address social problems: poverty, inequality, crime, racial tension, slums, bad hygiene, etc. So now, in the 1900s, there are churches who are now collaborating again with the state, right? So in the beginning, it was separated, and then it was joined, and then it's a bit separated again. And now, religion should help the state how to run the people, or how to have good, how to have good laws and good rules. And what happened during early 1900s, that religion got so involved in the state that you have World War II. And you see this is a good example of why a lot of churches are afraid of being too close to the state. In the Second World War, the churches in Germany, they collaborate with the Nazi government. And it's really painful, because if you see these pictures, the churches really supported Hitler. And despite the fact that Karl Barth, those are names of famous theologians, and also Bonhoeffer was against this, but they were minorities. Most of the people accept how state ruled the church, and eventually the church support the state. The church never has anything bad to say against the state, and there's amazing pictures. And it happened also during the apartheid era in South Africa. In South Africa, the church, the Reformed Church, they support apartheid system, which is a separation between the colored people and people of color and the whites. And this is something that again the church has supported in South Africa. So in the modern 20th and 21st century, the relation between the church and the state are, we have separation of state and church. Most of Europe are now like this. So state and the church is in the private area. Church should not be involved in state matters, right? And then there are involvement of church in state matters, and Indonesia, I think, is somehow in this area, and also the United States, I think. And the last one is the church is the state, but this is not common, right? Now in Indonesia, I want to share to you, religious symbols are everywhere. You know, if you wanna enter the bus, sometimes you see prayers, stickers on the bus. Like if you wanna enter the bus, you have to say prayers. Like it's common. It's not weird to see religious symbols everywhere in Indonesia. Eventually, you will find this really weird in Europe, for instance. But in Indonesia, that's fine. You see people praying, and you see politicians suddenly becomes religious when it is election time. And also, usually during election time, that is a time when churches receive a lot of donations from politicians to buy new keyboards and sound systems. So that happened during election time. I don't know last year if your church received donation last year. Probably yours have something to do with this. And I have to tell you, I'm a pastor of HKBP, and my church. I go to church here in HKBP Menteng, and in my church we have one minister. Minister Luhut Panjaitan is in our church, so if I preach, sometimes he's there. And also we have 4 parliament members in our church, a couple of generals. So when you preach, you have to be careful. Like, are you pro-government? Are you not pro-government? Even the parliament members are coming from 2 different factions. So you have to think about what you preach, right? You have to be careful. But it is not rare to see religious or a religion is interfering in public matters. For instance, and this is one of the examples and the proof that religion in Indonesia is very much involved. If for friends who are from who doesn't speak Indonesian, this is a picture of our national budget into 2020, before COVID, before the pandemic. If you see the number one budget was received by the Ministry of Defense. Number 2, Ministry of Housing and General Affairs. Number 3, the police. Number 4 is Ministry of Religious Affairs. Ministry of Religious Affairs is number 4, and Ministry of Education is in number 10. So in Indonesia, we think of, maybe we should have religion first, then you go for education. And it's really something that you have to think about. Ministry of Religion has more budget than Ministry of Health. Ministry of Religion has more budget than Ministry of Research. And that is a proof that Indonesia always think that religion should be in the public space, right? But this is the question. Then I want to close. Now, The youth has always eagerness and creative ideas for changes. Where do you see your role in society? Now, bear this in mind, that your church influence you. There are churches who think that we should not be involved in the matter of the society. If there are demonstrations, that is not our task. Our task as the church is to preach the gospel. That's it. But there are churches who went to the other side and said, well, you have to be involved in the society. And as a church, you are a civil society power. Then you have to be involved. As youth, you have to go and demonstrate whenever you think that you're voicing God's will, and which is a very difficult thing to discern. Or number two, do you think the church should be involved in public issues? For instance, now in Jakarta, we have uh, in Jakarta, you are in East. Most of you are in East. Are there Jakartans here? Yes, I think so. Uh, in Jakarta, we have problems now with the registration of the high school students. Registration of high school students, and there are demonstrations now on the street from parents who where when their child was not admitted to the schools that they wanted for some problems, I don't know what. But do you think the church should talk about this or leave it to the people? This is not our issue. And if you know, if you maybe I should inform you this, GKI Taman Yasmin, for instance, are still holding prayers in front of the palace in Monas, the presidential palace, every 2 weeks. Once in 2 weeks, every other week they will hold the service there because they are still protesting about religious freedom. And GKI also have different opinions of how we should be involved in this. I'm saying this because I also preach there, so I'm a kind of a rebel in this kind of issues. And also, who can contribute to those issues? The church as an organization or individuals? So the church send people or Christians in general. So if you're involved, you should be involved, but not as a church, not as a church member, just out of your faith, but you should not speak about your faith. So these are the questions that maybe we can talk about, especially in some regions. I know in some countries the churches are very much involved in the state problems or in the society, and in some levels the church says it's not our problem. And last thing that my last remark is that this is about the youth. I was I was grown in the I started my study in '98 when President Suharto was toppled down by the students' movement. I was demonstrating as a theological student. I was demonstrating. I got beaten up by police, by the army, I think, and I still follow some demonstrations as a habit. Uh, but then some people say, pastors should not do that. Church should not do that. That's not our task. Our task is to teach the people and not to demonstrate on the street. What is your role as youth of the church? So that I leave that here, and maybe we can discuss further. I give the time back to Pastor Vincent.
Thank you very much, Pastor Binsar, for your wonderful presentation. I'm very happy, and I believe a lot of our audiences are having a lot of insights from your talk. Okay, guys, I know in a lot of textbooks it says that our attention span can only last for 20 minutes. So Pastor Vince already presented his material for 20 minutes. So maybe you can just just a couple seconds. I don't want you to leave the screen. Okay, you can just take a deep breath and raise your hands, and then just Take deep breath in, out, in, out. Okay, you can just wiggle, wiggle. Here you go. Yeah, relax, stretch a little bit before we get to the second speaker of the day, Rabbi Melanie Aaron. So before we go to Rabbi Melanie, I'd like to remind you that you can start submitting your question to the group of Q&A group. I think the team already informed you of that. And as you follow along the conversation and the presentation of our speakers, so I'm really looking forward for your questions, because without your question we're not gonna go far. All right, I don't want to end up making a lot of questions to all our speakers. Okay, so all right, are you relaxed now? You want to shake more hands, shake your head a little bit, wiggle your tail? All right. If not, I would like to call to your attention. I would like to invite Rabbi Melanie Aaron to come and present her heart and her materials. As I told you before, that Rabbi, in case you were late coming to this Zoom meeting, she is my dear friend, and she and I had a conversation before. I visited her synagogue in Los Gatos a couple of times, bringing my youth to get to know the congregation there, and it was a fascinating experience for us all, and especially for me as a pastor. I learned a lot, so I'm pretty sure that you will learn a lot from Rabbi Melanie. All right, Rabbi Melanie, wherever you are, please say something.
All right.
So that we. All right, here she is.
So I'll say good evening from where I am in California, and good morning to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be with Vincent, and it was a pleasure to hear our speaker, Bin Sir Jonathan. And I have some thoughts about separation of church and state and the role of religion and tikkun olam, making the world a better place. But I thought it would be good for me to start with just some basics about Judaism. I am a rabbi of a congregation in suburban San Jose, not far from where Vincent is. And our name is indeed from the book of Psalms, Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, sing unto God a new song. And we are the new song in our area. Let's go on to the next slide. I think you'll have to advance. There we go. So Judaism is a very old religion, but it's a religion that is constantly changing. And the Bible is very important to us. It's very important to world religions, to Christianity, and to Islam as well. But it's also interesting to think about the history of Jews outside of the Bible and non-biblical evidence we have for our Jewish history. So on the right, you'll see the stelae of the pharaoh Merneptah. This is the first non-biblical reference we have to the Jewish people. And he tells us 3,000 plus years ago that Israel is no more. He's boasting about a military victory he has. And that's a great irony to us, that the first mention of the Jewish people outside the Bible is a mention of our demise. And for that reason, Jewish historians will talk about Israel as the ever dying people. And yet here we still are. The Bible is very important to us, but there's a whole literature that arose in Judaism around the time of the New Testament. The Mishnah, which was edited in the year 200 CE of the Common Era, ERA, and then the Talmud, which is commentaries on that from about the year 200 to the year 500. And this is where the customs we have today, the prayer worship that we have in our synagogues, the primacy of study, the non-hereditary leadership of teachers and rabbis, and the performance of good deeds. So we say the world stands on these three things: on worship, on study, and on deeds of loving kindness. And when I teach history, I like to say that change is what is constant in Jewish life, because a religion that's been around for 3,000 plus years has had to continuously adapt to changing circumstances. And we believe that the biblical text unfolds like a diamond with many different facets. And in that way, it speaks to us in our changing times and circumstances. Let's go on to the next slide. One thing that I think is very helpful in thinking about the Jewish people and understanding Jews is to understand how few Jewish people there are on the earth. Even in the United States, which is a relatively large Jewish community, we are probably only about 2%, maybe a little bit more, of the population. Now, Jews tend to live in urban areas and in that way are much more visible in the United States than their numbers would really indicate. Of all the Jews in the world, 80% live either in the United States or the state of Israel. So you can see why these two countries are very important to Jewish life. That wasn't the case at the beginning of the 20th century, when Jews really lived all over the world. But in the time since, the Jewish community in Europe was decimated by the Holocaust, and the Jews of North Africa and Arab countries either left or were expelled. And so Jews are now highly concentrated in the United States or in Israel. And something else, if you look at the chart to the right, you'll see that in 1939, at the beginning of World War II, there were more than 16 million Jews in the world. 6 million were killed by the Nazis between 1939 and 1945. And though the Jewish population has inched up since, there are still less Jews in the world today than there were in 1939. And I think it's helpful to understand that, to understand why for Jews, the Holocaust, even 70 years later, is still such a major issue, and also why Jewish continuity, passing Judaism on from one generation to the next, is such a big issue for such a small people, because the fear that we will disappear remains with the Jewish community at all times. And I think it helps explain the way we think of things. Let's go on to the next slide. I assumed that since I was a woman rabbi, there might be some special interest in women and Judaism. To the right, we have one of the few photographs of the first woman who was ordained as a rabbi. Her name was Regina Jonas. She wasn't ordained at a seminary, but was privately ordained in Berlin in the years leading up to World War II. She served the Jewish community in Berlin, and then unfortunately was taken by the Nazis to Theresienstadt, one of the concentration camps, and died during the war. So we don't have any continuity from her, but we do look to her as really somebody that we can admire, somebody who set a pattern that we then picked up in the United States. There are many outstanding women in the Bible, some in roles that one associates with women as mothers, as wives, as sisters, but some in less familiar roles. Deborah, who was a judge and led the people in war. Huldah, that nobody knows about, which is a shame. She's very important. When they found the scroll of Deuteronomy and doing renovations in the ancient temple, they went to Huldah to understand what it was about. And she is one of 4 women prophets in the Bible. Also, throughout history, there were very important women. Bruria was a great scholar mentioned in the Talmud. And Gracia Nasi reminds us that there is the Sephardic, the Spanish, North African element of the Jewish community, as well as the Ashkenazi, the European element in the Jewish community. And she had escaped from the Inquisition, went to Turkey, established a financial network there, and rescued many Jews from the Inquisition. In the United States, the Jewish community has been impacted by two waves of feminism. In the 1920s, when women won the right to vote in the United States, the 19th Amendment, women in suffrage, that influenced the way people thought about women in religion as well. So in the 1920s, people began to talk about women rabbis. They didn't ordain women rabbis, but at least they began to discuss it. And the first bat mitzvah, that is a coming of age religious ceremony for a girl, was in 1922, Judith Kaplan. The second wave of feminism in the United States in the 1970s brought about further changes, more study of women in Judaism, more roles for women in the synagogue, more emphasis on girls being named when they are born and coming to bat mitzvah. And in 1972, Sally Prysand was the first woman rabbi ever ordained by a seminary, by a rabbinical school. And today, women are ordained not only in the Reform movement, but in the Reconstructionist movement and in the conservative movement, and a little bit in the Orthodox movement, though they call them other names, not rabbis, but more or less the same function. So that when I was ordained in 1981, there were less than 20 ordained women, and now there are more than 700. It used to be if somebody met a woman rabbi, I knew their whole life story. And now it's such a pleasure that people will meet women rabbis in other places, and I don't know them because there are just so many, which is a great advance for women in Judaism. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about the pandemic and issues in the United States. In the United States, disproportionately, people of color have been impacted by the pandemic, both because of inadequacies of healthcare and because they are not able to shelter in place but are fulfilling essential work roles. And we also have racism in terms of blaming others for the illness and for the economic disaster. Um, Historically, Jews have been blamed for all kinds of disasters, the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. And even today, we see on social media all kinds of conspiracy theories, blaming of George Soros and so forth, things that have no grounding in fact. But also in the United States, there has been the scapegoating of Asian and Pacific Islander Americans, and even verbal attacks on them in public places like supermarkets. So it's something our society, American society, really has to confront, along with the systemic racism against Blacks and the Black Lives Matter movement. All right, we'll see the next slide here. The picture is of an African-American scholar named Eric Ward, and he has done a lot of work on the issue of conspiracies. There's a pop song in America, Love is Love is Love. I don't know if it's popular in Indonesia, but unfortunately, hate is hate is hate is also true, and haters have grouped together. So what Eric Ward has written about, along with others, is that the roots of racism, of anti-Semitism, of homophobia, of xenophobia, the fear of outsiders, is found in the white supremacist movements in the United States, and it comes from a common root, and unfortunately, much of it is motivated by anti-Semitism. We worry about conspiracy theories spreading on the internet. They spread, the less grounding they have, the more they seem to spread. And this is an issue of concern for us. What Judaism stresses is our shared human heritage, the belief that every human is created in the image of God. Jews don't believe that only Jewish people go to heaven. We are taught in the Talmud, the righteous of all nations have a place in the world to come. And our outlook is our responsibility is to love our neighbor as ourselves, both the neighbor who is close to us and also the stranger. In Leviticus 19, you'll see it talks both about loving your neighbor as yourself and loving the stranger as yourself. And American Jews in particular identify with the teaching of tikkun olam, of our responsibility for the repair of the world. And that's something that is very central to American Jewish life. I'm going to take just one more minute to speak a little bit more personally. Let's go to the last slide. And that has to do with how we cope as individuals with this pandemic and with some of the difficulties, the added stress that we are feeling at this time. What I've found is that much of the advice that we're given on how to deal with this stress and how to get through the pandemic is about very simple things, things that might seem like common sense, self care, getting enough sleep, eating sensibly, exercising every day, finding ways of centering yourself, whether that's through meditation or prayer or yoga, creating patterns and schedules, because that's something that helps us relax at a time of stress, and also finding ways of connecting with other people, even if it has to be via Zoom, like this conference. It's still a sense of community and connecting. Now, these are things that seem very simple, and sometimes we don't do the things that are simple. So I want to share a story from the book of Second Kings about the time when the king of Aram sent a letter to the king of Israel saying that he had a general who was very dear to him who had been stricken with leprosy, and he was going to send this general Naaman to Israel to be cured of his leprosy. Now, the king of Israel, when he got this letter, was distraught. This could be an international incident. What if they weren't able to cure Naaman of his leprosy? But the prophet Elisha said to him, "Don't worry, I've got this. Just send Naaman to me." So Naaman came to Israel, and he went to the prophet Elisha, and the prophet Elisha told him to bathe in the Jordan River. Now, that picture makes it seem like there's a fair amount of water in the Jordan River. Maybe in those days there was more. I've been there to Israel many times, and it's a tiny little river. And the prophet and the general Naaman was insulted by the prophet to tell him to bathe in this tiny little river. He had perfectly good rivers back at home. But the servants convinced him to try it. And sure enough, it helped him. It cured his leprosy, and he became somebody who revered the God of Israel. I like this story because I think we have this tendency to discount those things that seem too simple, that seem too normal, and not to do them, even though they can do us a lot of good. So I want to recommend to all of us as we get through this stressful period to try to do those aspects of self care, of finding a way to center ourselves, of finding a way of connecting ourselves with others so that we can cope with the stress that we're feeling at this time. I'm going to conclude here, and I hope that I'll have a chance to answer some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Melanie Aaron. We appreciate it. So I'd like all of you to give a round of applause to our presentation presenters, Pastor Binsar and Rabbi Melanie. Clap your hands. Thank you so much for your time and your sharing from your heart and the wisdom that you have shared with us all. So I believe all of you already got kind of direction how to submit your questions if you have questions, and I'd like you all to kind of just write it up and send it to the committee that will sort it out. I know we have in my note here we had about 100 plus 96 people joining our Zoom meeting, and it's not counting the YouTube audience as well. So it's quite a lot of people. I know probably if it's going to be a lot of question, I will have to sort it through, and so that we can have enough time for each presenter to answer them. All right. So again, it's a 20 minutes. So just relax a little bit, stretch your hands, wiggle your head. Okay, drink your coffee, or I have my water jug here. All right, you take yeah, or you can yawn a little bit, stretch a little bit. I know sitting too long can take the tolls on your body, as Rabbi Melanie said. The normal thing, just something ordinary can help you to go through the day. All right, so here you go. Write up your questions and send it to us all, and send it to me. So yes, I do have some questions that came to my uh, what is it to my cell phone here. The first one is for Pastor Binsar from Natasha GKI Darmo Satellite. She asks, what are the positive and negative aspects of staying silent or and being involved? I think what she meant is staying silent in the midst of this whole turmoils, or being involved in the movement, or whatever she meant. Okay.
Hi. I think I'd like to
Here
explain
goes.
my question a little bit, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Please,
So my
please.
original question was to Pendeta Pinsar. In your personal opinion, to what extent should the church be politically involved? So
Here you go.
that was the follow-up question. What are the positive and negative aspects of either staying silent or being politically involved? Thank you.
Should I answer this directly or?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead, Pastor Binsar. Yeah, we're gonna take turn between you and Rabbi Melanie,
Thank you
so
very
that
much.
you have equal share. All right.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I think that's really a very important question. My personal opinion, you're asking my personal opinion. My personal opinion, I think the church should be involved in the process making of the nation. For instance, last year we had a lot of demonstrations of RU, KUHP, and the bill against sexual discrimination. I think sexual violence last year, and you remember a lot of students were out there demonstrating, and I've heard a lot of churches say, oh, that's not our task. But actually, if you know, when the bill is passed, we all will be involved and we have to submit to that law. So you can stay silent, but then you have to follow the law. Or you can say something if something does not fit. And I think this is one of the things that Protestant churches in Indonesia are not equipped for. We're not ready. The Catholic Church, they're actively involved in this. They have a team that actively lobbying the draft, different drafts. They speak their mind. If you see interviews on television, you see a lot of Catholic pastors or Catholic leaders who are speaking out, but you don't see Protestant leaders. We are we are safe in our own cocoon. We don't speak out, and that's why during the whole discussion, sometimes we are not involved. And the negative aspect is that whether you like it or not, the bill influence you and you have to follow it. For instance, last year we have a bill of that the state wants to regulate Sunday school, if you have heard about it. And then suddenly everybody was surprised, like, oh, where did this come from? Yeah, we didn't know because we were not involved. But if it was passed, then Sunday school will have to report the number of students, the curriculum, and the state will arrange all of this. Um, so you have, in my personal opinion, I think you have to be involved. But then if you want to be involved, then you have to be equipped. You have to know what you're talking about. Don't just go out there on the streets and don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, you have to be you have to learn. You have to be equipped by the issues and the correct things that we want to discuss. In that way, I see that the youth are equipped with that. We can do. I say we. I feel young. I'm not anymore, but I feel young. Not your age, but I mean, we can still do this. And I'm actively, like telling church leaders, look, you cannot stay silent when the issues are affecting us. We have to talk about it because this is, if you want to fix, if you want to do change, you have to do it systemically. You cannot do it fighting in your own turf. We have to do it together. You cannot do it in Bondowoso just only for Bondowoso. You cannot do it in Madura. You have to do it together. So that's my take on it. Thank you very much, Natasha. Very good question. I think you should
Thank
study
you.
political theology. Come to Jakarta.
And she can be the second women president, right? All right, there's a question for Rabbi Melanie here from Yossi GKI Tumapel. He has two questions, and apparently he read a lot of books here. So the first one: why do you still choose Judaism as your religion despite the hardship faced by the Jewish people in the U.S.? So you got that one. The second one is: are popular conspiracy theories such as Rothschild family true? Are not those theories made by the U.S. government to discriminate the Jews? There you go.
Okay, so those are some tough questions, and let me see what I can do.
Okay.
I would say that even though there is anti-Semitism in the United States, and unfortunately it's been on the rise in recent years, particularly since 2016, on the whole, the experience of American Jews has been a much more positive one than the experience of Jews in Europe or in other parts of the world. And I attribute that to the separation of church and state, that in the United States, there is no established religion. In fact, our Bill of Rights speaks about how the government cannot establish religion. And that has given the Jews the opportunity to participate kind of on an even keel with other members of society. That even though the majority of Americans, the vast majority of Americans are still Christian, it doesn't mean that it's a Christian country. In terms of government sponsored anti Semitism, there has only been really one incident with General Grant back during the days of the Civil War, but the government has not endorsed or has not promoted anti Semitism. And that's very significant. Where there is anti Semitism, it comes from a group of people, a minority. And so the government is able to protect its citizens, all of its citizens. In terms of conspiracy theories, I don't believe that they are organized by the United States government. Some of them go back to a very famous book that the Tsar put together more than 100 years ago, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was a forgery when it was created by the Tsar in Russia, and it continues to be a forgery even when it's reprinted in all different parts of the world. There was a Rothschild family, but they don't control all of the economics of the world. They don't control all of the banks. George Soros exists, and he shares his wealth with many organizations, but he is not pulling the strings behind governmental leaders. And I think when we start thinking in terms of conspiracy theories, typically there's no way of verifying it, because if you tell somebody, well, that isn't what happened, they say, well, that's just because you don't, you're not really looking at it. It's like the people who believe the United States didn't walk on the moon. If you show them pictures, they say, oh, well, somebody made up those pictures. So there's no way to argue. But I think we need to be very, very careful before we believe in these kinds of conspiracy theories. And we need to kind of test it against things. I was at a meeting a year ago where people said Jews control all the real estate in Los Angeles. And I thought, huh, that's kind of interesting. Let me Google who owns real estate in Los Angeles and let's just see if those are Jewish names. And there are some, but is that really all? So we need to live in a factual based society. For prejudice in America, the victims of prejudice in America first are African Americans, and second are gay men in particular. And Jews are only third. We're not rushing to be first. This is not that kind of competition, but just to put things in some kind of perspective and how we all have to fight prejudice together.
Wonderful. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Second question for Pastor Binsar from Arvin, Yayasan Pengharapan Missio Dei. To what extent have the churches, particularly Christian youth, done to tackle the extremists in societies?
To what extent? Thank you for the question. To what extent? Well, this is the thing. When you think that is not your problem, sometimes we are not involved. We don't participate. We think that it's not our problem. We think the state should do that. But you have to remember. Maybe we are coming from where we are right now. Maybe we're coming from an area where the Christian are the minority, or I don't like to use the term minority, majority, but we are coming from an area where we are we are less in terms of numbers. But you have to remember that there are some areas in Indonesia where Christians are majority. And in those areas, you can also see Christian extremism. And you have to realize this, that whenever a certain area, a certain religion is a majority in what area, we have the tendency to become extremists. And that's why I think extremists in terms of forcing other people to admit our religion, that we only admit that ours is the true one and yours are the wrong one. So to that extent, I think we have to realize this, and we have to try to tackle this in our own churches and working together, because this is not an alone issue. This is our issue. If one of the small things, for instance, how many Muslim friends do you have on your phone? How many phone numbers do you have? Do you have any? This is because sometimes we go to private school. We don't have people from other faith, other ethnicities, or we don't have the opportunity to work with them, so we don't know. It's really strange for me, because I'm coming from probably a different background. I was in a public school for high school, and SMP, SMA, I was in public school. So I have friends from all over places, and I have friends from all ethnicities and religions. So for me, it was okay. But then now I can see that my son enters a private school, for instance, and there's only Christians there, and they have to be taught about other religion, like this is other religion, this is how you greet them. Like it's really strange for me that youth today, probably some of you never even been to a mosque, even though probably the nearest mosque would be less than 100 meters away from your house. So I mean, we have to we have to acknowledge that even people of other faith are our brothers and sisters. We are one, like Rabbi Melanie said. We are all created by God. Everyone is created by God, and we are together in this. So we have to tackle this. We have to make youth churches, the youth of the churches. We have to go to other religions. We have to hold activities together. If you have the Indonesian independence celebration, don't do it at church. Come on, man. Go outside and do it in your own region. I see the tendency that churches are now holding the Independence Day celebration in their own church. They play with their own fellow youth. Go to your neighbors. They play with them, celebrate it with them. Don't go in your own Christian uh, background. Go somewhere else. That's how you do it. That's how you know each other. That's how we interact with each other. That's how we listen to each other. And we really need that. So we will not have an extremist view of our own, or we suspect that other people are extremists. I think that's really important. We have to do it. Thank you.
Nice, thank you. I think I'd like to expand this, the question that Arvin stated to Pastor Binsar to Rabbi Melanie. Probably the same question, but a little different, context. I'd like to rephrase it to what extent then that the Jewish community have done to tackle the prejudice against their own community. You mentioned that the prejudices in a rise since 2016. So what would the Jewish community have been have done?
I think that's a good question. And I also want to answer the question that Pastor Jonathan was talking about, because every religious group has extremists. In the United States, 85% of the community, the Jewish community in 2018, voted for Democratic candidates. They supported Hillary Clinton and they supported President Obama. But there are small groups of Jewish extremists also. And where that becomes more problematic is in Israel, where you have a country that's very divided, frightened about security. And so it's easier for extremist groups to get some kind of hold. I was very gratified that in Israel's recent series, I don't know if you've been following, they had to have elections 3 times because they couldn't put a government together. But there was an extremist racist party of Mayor Kahane, and they did not get enough votes to be in the parliament, so the Israeli Knesset. So that was reassuring that even though there are extremists, that they haven't taken hold in a significant enough number to make it into parliament. I forget what the threshold is, 5% or something. But it remains an issue that we have to be concerned of within our community and also outside. In the United States, some people like the president and some people don't like the president. The same thing in Israel. Some people like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and some people don't. Many American Jews feel a love for Israel because it is a tie we have because of the Bible, because of the Jewish people, but we don't necessarily agree with the next policy of the government there. And maybe you've had that experience in the places where you live, where you can love your country and be very patriotic and still have differences with a government policy. In terms of combating anti-Semitism, Jews have put a lot of effort into education. We feel sometimes it's because people don't know, they might never have met someone who's Jewish, they might not have the opportunity to learn about Judaism. So an organization called the Anti-Defamation League has worked on combating ignorance about Judaism. We also believe in working with allies. So let's work together with other ethnic groups. And then this is one that may be controversial with some of the younger people here. The Anti-Defamation League would like to see more controls on social media in terms of what can be posted there, in terms of things that are not true or conspiracy theories. And I find in my congregation, when I say that to the young people in the congregation in their 20s who work for Google and Facebook and so forth, they say information wants to be free. They don't want to see any kind of restriction. They say free speech. But there is a tension because things can get a lot of play on social media without anyone really knowing whether they're true or even who placed it on social media in the first place. So the older community would like to see more controls. I'm not sure the younger community agrees.
Wow, thank you. All right, that's wonderful. Question for Pastor Vincent from EFANG, GKI San Francisco. What is the boundary, or to what extent do you think church should interfere with political matter or state matter? What is the least participation but deep impact we can do as youth group or individuals? Can you mention some examples? You got that question?
Okay, can you read it once again? Because I had more like this here.
All right. What is the boundary, or to what extent do you think church should interfere with political matter or state matter? What is, I think it's a twofold questions here. What is the least participation but deep impact we can do as youth group or individuals? Please state some examples.
Okay. Thank you for the question. It's really interesting. To what extent, I think we should talk about the issue and not as if that we are should be actively in the decision making process. What I mean is that when we are talking about justice, inequality, social situation of our respective countries, that is the issue that we have to talk about, because when we are talking about in terms of speaking of the words of God and the gospel, for instance, then we should talk about the issues that matters and also connect with everyone. It's not only our issues. Justice, inequality, and social issues are the things that we have to talk about. And I think to that extent, we have to talk about it. We should not stay silent. Whenever you see injustice, you have to speak against it. So you have to just look at it from this perspective. If the Bible says, it's not right, you have to say something. It's not right that you have racism, because then you're blaming or other people just because of the color of their skin or their ethnicities. It's not right. So these are the things that you have to talk about. And then to what is the least thing that we can do with a big impact? I can give you some examples. For instance, you can have discussions in church about the things that are happening in the society. So don't talk about salvation. What is the church? Don't talk about heaven and earth. Don't only talk about it. Of course, you have to talk about it, but don't only talk about it. Don't talk about, the topics for youth, relationship and youth, about love. Don't only talk about it. Talk also about things that matter. Empower the youth, equip them with knowledge, and show them the issues. Show them that the world is a big place. Don't be narrowed down only to your area, to what you want to hear. Listen to other parts of the world. So that is one thing, the least thing that you can do with an impact. I have to tell you, I can give you an example. For instance, I have some friends in the parliament right now. Like friends, not because I was friend with them during demonstration era, and ended up becoming a pastor. They become a parliament member. But whenever I have things that I would like to say, I can text them and say, hey, take a look at this issue. Um, in that particular example, we were coming from the same church. We had the discussion in the church, and now when they become parliament member, you know who to call, you know who to contact if you have things to say. So this is the thing that I want to say. Please have events where we are discussing about real things, real issues that are happening in our society, in our country, in the world, environmental issues, inequalities, a lot of stuff. Empower them, and then if they are interested, they will create a support group. They will create something else, and be involved, support them, and you'll never know, they might become a parliament member. So that's the least thing that you can do. To that extent, if you wanna, I think, if you wanna maximize, if you wanna have a maximum influence, then you have to preach in front of the minister, like what my chances are in my church. So that's the thing that you can do. You preach to someone who takes the decision of your country. I think not, you cannot ask more than that. So think about that and be brave, be courageous, say what is right. Don't be afraid to say what is right just because you don't want to offend someone. Say what is right, and that's the least thing that you can do.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Pastor Vincent. Question for Rabbi Melanie. This is from Christine GKI Tuban. Do you think that Christianity influenced the anti-Semitic prejudice? Now that's a tough question.
It's a tough question for this audience.
Yes.
Without offending, I think there is a very complicated relationship between Judaism and Christianity, and that there have been periods when Christianity has been more positive on Judaism and periods that it's been more difficult. Even if you look at the New Testament, you can see kind of layers. At the beginning of Christianity, remember, all the apostles, they were all Jewish. It wasn't just that Judas was Jewish, everybody was Jewish. Jesus was Jewish and was in a Jewish milieu. And so the very early things about Judaism were very positive about Judaism, and there was a lot of continuity. But in the period of the Jewish rebellion against the Romans, particularly in the period of Bar Kokhba, now we're talking about 135 CE, the early Christians didn't want to be associated with those rebels who the Romans were killing all the time and burning alive and so forth. And you see more of a distinction, a growing separation between Judaism and the no longer Hebrew Christians, but now really a separate group of Christians. When the Roman Empire became Christian, it became even more difficult because now the power of the state was in the hands of Christianity. And to some extent, there were theologians who believed that an example should be made of the Jewish people of what should be the status of those who refuse to accept Jesus as the Messiah. Jews believed that Jesus existed, that he was killed by the Romans, along with many other Jewish leaders of that time period. But in certain periods, the church believed in making an example of the Jews. So restricting their employment, restricting the size of a synagogue, restricting the height of the building, saying that Christians couldn't work for Jews. And I do believe that in Europe, the lingering impact of that was a level of anti-Semitism that set the stage even for the rise of Hitler and the anti-Semitism in Germany. What's been remarkable has been what has happened after World War II. Vatican II in the Catholic Church, which was a sea change in not holding the Jews responsible any longer for the crucifixion of Jesus. and the changes that took place in Protestant Christianity as well, beginning in the 60s and through the 70s and 80s and so forth. So I think we live in a different world today in terms of understanding Jewish Christian relations. And I'm always pleased that now I find Christians are interested in pursuing the Jewish roots of their religion and learning more about Judaism, learning about Jewish holidays. But there is, particularly in Europe, a very unhappy history.
Hmm, great, thank you. Thank you. Going back to Pastor Binsar, this is a question from Adinugraha from GKI San Jose. Talking about systemic racism in Indonesia, does it feel like it has gone full reverse? Because and he also said that lots of Indonesian native Indonesian call their Indonesian Chinese counterpart koko or jeje at the mall, even picked up some Indo Chinese slang. Isn't that an example of cultural appropriation?
uh, well, for Rabbi Melanie, maybe just a little bit, I think I have to inform you that in Indonesia, we have no grudges whatsoever to the Jewish community. In fact, if there is something happen in Israel, the Indonesian people will say, "Wow, we support Israel." The Christians, which is, yeah, which is also something that is interesting to just mention to you. The question about what happened to the Chinese ethnicities in Indonesia, also a bit similar with what happened to the Jewish community in Europe, because I also learned about this. The Chinese ethnicity when they came to Indonesia, the Dutch government. This is I blame this on the Dutch. Please bear with me. I blame this on the Dutch. The Dutch government systemically stop the Chinese ethnicities from entering the government of positions or purchasing land. One of the true examples in Jakarta, they were placed in certain areas, but they were given the ability to trade. They were the traders, and that's why they have so much economical influence, but they don't have the power. They don't have political power. And of course, what will happen if the political power don't have money and the economical power don't have power, there will be kind of cooperation between the two. And there goes the corruption. But anyways, uh, the Indonesian people, I think now we are becoming more sensitive of this issue of and and I think uh, it depends on how deeply rooted we are in this. I uh, I see prejudices um, against the Chinese in Indonesia, especially during the 98 90 was it 98 98 I think, yeah,
Yeah, riots.
the 98 riots, and afterwards everybody is saying bad things about the Chinese, and I know that crime crime happened, and I'm one of the people who are now speaking.
Oh, I think Pak Binsar,
Sorry,
you muted
sorry,
yourself.
yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Uh, we have to talk about this, and you know, uh, prejudices happen because we are living in separate bubbles. Uh, we are living in that bubble, they are living in that bubble, and sometimes we have to meet in a public place and we don't know how to react, we don't know how to communicate. um, in I once let me give you let me share my experience. I once preached in GKI in Jakarta. I think it was in GKI, I forgot which GKI. So I misspoke, right? I misspoke. I usually when I preach, I use presentations. In the presentations, um, I think I wrote China, right? But I said Tiongkok, right? I was talking about the Tiongkok government, the Chinese government, not here, not Indonesia, but Tiongkok. And then after the sermon, one of the elders, he came to me and said, "Well, when you use that word China, when I was referring to the country, he said I was offended because the Suharto government always make fun of us." And I said, "I'm really sorry. I should be more sensitive. I'm really sorry." So you see, different people have different reactions on this, and I think that one of the solutions is that we have to talk about it. One of the tendencies of our nation in Indonesia is that when you have a problem, you tend to bury it and you don't talk about it, and you forget about it. Remember the floods in Jakarta in January? Nobody's talking about it anymore. And then next year we will again complain against the flooding in Jakarta. And then after in April we will not talk about it again. And then in January we'll talk about it. And that is the one of the things that we have. We have forgetfulness, and forgetting is a good way, but also is a terrible way of coping with problems. We have to talk about this. If you are offended, please tell people about that. Like for me, people will call me Bang automatically. Bang is I don't know, I think in Java you call Mas, and then people will call me Bang. For me, it's okay. For me, it's not racially. Uh, I also call Koko and Chi to people who are older than me, and I know from Chinese ethnicities as a term of endearment. I never meant to hurt anyone, but if they don't like it, then they have to say it, because that's the use of communication. If you're offended, then we will not use it anymore. It depends on how you you say it. Sometimes you can say it in a really mocking way, but you can also use it in a very polite way as a term of that you are appreciating their culture. And I think I'm the one who always use different languages when I go to certain areas. When I go to Padang, I will say udo. When I go to Makassar, I will say daeng. When I go to Bali, I will say beli. When I go to Java, I will say mas. And when I go to GKI, I say koko. So I mean, but if it's a problem, then I think we should talk about it, because these are the things that we have to discuss. For instance, in the Netherlands, they have an issue of Zwarte Piet, the Black Piet. Zwarte Piet, every Christmas they have this Sinterklaas with two assistants with black face. Uh, uh, and then they were okay for all this time, and then suddenly the black community say, no, it's not okay. It's offending us. So if it's not okay, then we have to talk about it, and then we can change after the discussion. So that's my take on it.
Great, thank you so much. Yes. We only have 10 minutes, so I still have some questions, but so I have a couple of questions for Rabbi Melanie, and if we have a little bit more time, I can just address it to both of you. But this is a question, Rabbi Melanie, just a little. When I was growing up in Indonesia, I don't know about it now, but yes, we, as what Pak Binsar said, that we Indonesians really look up to the Jewish people. And we always think that the Jewish people is very superior and a chosen people, really, as the Bible said it. And we know a lot of famous people. Now it's like, the Facebook person, Mark Zuckerberg, is a Jewish person. And also the Wonder Woman, right? Gal Gadot. She's the prettiest woman, we just like adore them, stuff like that. So we just have a very a good respect and honor of the Jewish people. But of course, it come with some kind of a negative assumption. So this is a question from Naomi from GKI Madiun. How can we change our negative assumption to on the Jewish community? I'm not too sure what kind of a negative assumption that she was presenting there, but I think you can talk a little bit about that. And there's some others. And what is there's another one that somewhat it comes from Evangeline GKI San Francisco. Can you please share some simple thing that you've been doing, a woman Jewish leader? All right. So now the
Okay.
next one is okay. Go ahead.
Is there one more you want to throw in there?
Oh no, the last one is just gonna be for both of you. But yeah, go ahead, answer those two questions first.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say one word about the issue of chosen people. I appreciate that Christians cherish that from the Bible, but for Jews, it's very careful. We want to be very careful how people understand it. It's not that God only cares about the Jews or Jews get to go first in line or anything like that. The Bible is very clear if you read the prophets that God is the God of all the different nations. And it's the sense that Jews have a particular mission or responsibility. So within the Jewish world, it's not you're better than, but it's more like, your mother calls you to account because you're the older child and you got to set a good example for your younger brother and sister. So it's like God saying, you have this mission, and if you don't do it, it's kind of worse. It isn't obligations on other people to do these things, but you need to do them. So that's our understanding of chosen people. Maybe choosing is a better word for it, that Jews have to choose to do the right thing. And some famous Jewish theologians say we shouldn't talk about it at all because the language is so problematic. In terms of negative stereotypes, I think in some ways Jews are kind of like the Asian community in the United States, that there can be stereotypes that are positive, but they can also come back and bite you. We had a young woman in our congregation whose parents were Korean and Jewish, and she hated math. But all the teachers assumed because she was Asian, she was good at math. Well, that wasn't fair, and she grew up to become an artist. So we have to be careful about some of these stereotypes. There are some very prominent Jews, there are some wealthy Jews, but there are also Jews who are poor. 20% of the Jewish community in the United States today, we worry about them not being able to meet their basic needs. So we have to be careful with those kinds of stereotypes that even if you hear or see people in the news, you have to understand the Jewish community is much more diverse than that. Some of the helpful things that we're doing now, I'm thinking for our congregation, we have a helpline. The people who are social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists in the congregation have offered to create a line. Maybe you don't want to see a doctor, but something is weighing on you, or you're working in a hospital and you're very stressed by your work. You don't want to bring it home. So we've created this helpline. We also bring little treats to people on Friday afternoon with the bread for the Sabbath. If you've been in the hospital, if we know it's been a bad week, if you've gotten laid off at work, to try to create more of that community feeling. In terms of our political work, we don't do directly partisan things. We can't support a particular party, but we can do voter registration, we can do get out the vote, and when there's a value at stake, we can speak out for a particular, we have a lot of things on the ballot where we can say, yes, we are for equality or we are for education, not partisan, but we can support particular ballot issues. So those are some of the things that we try to do to be helpful. We had a little push for transportation for the elderly, but now nobody can go out of their house. So it's a little moot, but hopefully the day will come when we can work on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Just, I think, yeah, just just a quick question. I think both of you can just give a very quick example, a very short example of. There's a question from Liv Clementine GKI Timur. Sorry, can you tell us the example of what we as youth can do to make it to what is that to make peace at our society? No, I think it's not make peace, but it's more like propagate peace in our community. So maybe we can start with Pastor Binsar and then follow by Rabbi Melanie. I think that's the last question for the night. Go ahead. I mean, for the day. Go ahead.
Can you repeat again? Sorry.
Can you give us an example of action for the youth
Oh yeah.
to make peace, or to to express peace, or to what's that, to cultivate peace in our community?
Okay, I have two ideas. I have two
Go ahead.
ideas. Sure. Once first, have a youth discussion on politics, on environment, on justice, on inequality, the things that are happening in our midst. Not only talking about the church issues, dogmatic or love or work or whatever. You have to talk about what's happening in our world. That's first. That's the first. The second one is go out and meet youth from other religions. Play with them, play soccer with them. If you know them well, you can have fun and make jokes that probably are offensive in some areas, but it's okay. Like for instance, when I was when we were a student of Jakarta Theological Seminary, we used to play football with the students of the State Muslim Institute. The one who become the imam, and then we said the losers will switch religion. The losers should convert, and we all laugh. Like we won, but they did not convert. But anyways, it's fun when you know the people. You can make fun of each other like that. Take it lightly. Don't take everything to your heart. We should have jokes once in a while.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. And, go out of your comfort zone, right? And then speak up. All right, Rabbi Melanie, do you have any
Well,
tips for?
I'm gonna build on that. It's
All right.
very important that we be in dialogue with people who are different than ourselves. If we can do it in our living rooms, so much the better. Each of us is like an iceberg. There's just a little bit that is above the water, but there's a lot underneath. And if we can hear the story of the people who aren't like us, then we can't hate them. Then we begin to understand them. So dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. And I'm so thankful to have been invited to be part of this dialogue this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that's exactly what this day is all about, right? Dialogue and conversation, and trying to get a common ground and celebrate our common ground together. And yeah, just 1 minute, have a minute for each one of you. Any last statement as a closing? Pastor Binsar, you like to close with a statement, a short statement?
Yeah, I think the command, my statement would be that the command to love your neighbor doesn't fall into your Christian neighbor. The command to love your neighbor means that you love everybody. And loving means that you go out of your comfort zone and embrace the others. So make friends, go out and have some fun with them. That's it.
Wonderful. And
Well,
Rabbi Melanie?
Well, since Habakkuk was mentioned, there's a verse from Habakkuk that I like very much, which is the righteous shall live by their faith, which to Jews means you have to live your faith in your everyday life. And if you say that your value is generosity, you have to live generosity. And if you say your value is caring, you have to live caring. So we can each try to bring the values that we esteem on Saturday or Sunday into the rest of the week.
Oh, beautiful. All right. Well, I think that's covered it all, friends. Can you all give a round of applause to our wonderful presenters this morning? Pastor Binsar, thank you so much for your insight to speak up and to never stay silent in the midst of this whole chaos. Just keep on making friends and have fun with them. and go out of your comfort zone. And Rabbi Melanie, thank you so much. I know that this is your Sabbath day, I believe you, and
Well,
you made a
start already.
time
The
to.
Sabbath is gone. Yeah.
It's gone. All right, good. So I feel better. We feel better. Okay. So we're blessed that you can be part of this discussion, and I believe your insight and your heart, your experience, your life has been, it's somewhat obviously discerned and accepted here in this global community. So we're blessed, and thank you for your time and energy to trying to come up with this presentation. Thank you all, friends, and I'm going to return this to the Mr. MC, Captain.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Binsar and Rabbi Melanie for sharing and giving us all the insight. And also thank you, Pastor Vincent, for moderating today's session and connecting us with the speakers. Give applause to them. Okay, I will check your spirit. Okay, I will check your spirit in your place.
So before I leave, what's next for our presenters? For Rabbi Melanie, Pastor Binsar, and myself, should we continue to join this, or you can discharge us?
Okay.
Do you have to stay, or we have to go, or you want to kick us out, or what?
It's actually up to you.
Oh, it's up to me, up to us all. Okay.
Yeah.
So Pastor Binsar and Rabbi Melanie, and I think you're welcome to stay. And if you have more time to spare, just stay around, or if not, we can just go home. Well, just go to sleep. I mean, for me and Rabbi Melanie.
Yeah, I think we'll call it a night, but it's been a delight to be with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So me too then. I have to preach tomorrow. God bless you all.
Bye-bye.
And I also will excuse myself. Thank you, Pastor Vincent. Thank you, Rabbi Melanie. Well, I already recorded my sermon, so I'm going to watch myself on YouTube.
You're lucky. I have to stream live tomorrow. Blessing to you all, friends.
Okay, bye. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, I will check your spirit in your place. Are you ready, guys?
Aye, Captain.
I can hear you.
Aye, Captain.
Okay, thank you for your spirit. And I will offer to Diva.
So, guys, because today's session has ended, or will be soon enough, before that, we would like to remind you all, and we will never get tired to remind you all to be active in your small group and just be active with your facilitator to discuss about the things we had learned today, because each group will present their conclusion and points that had been learned in each day of conference.
Okay, I have more. Okay.
Okay.
I have more information. In Monday, June 29, 2020, we will learn about spiritual and mental health. And the speakers are Anita Sierra and Reverend Elaine O'Rourke. Okay, guys, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you can join again in the next session. Have a nice day. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.